Swords of Meropis and the Wretched Blood of the Undying Witch God is a Kickstarter that I backed. It recently fulfilled with a print on demand from Drive Thru RPG. The game includes rules for solo play, and the core rules really complement the solo gameplay. So let's get into this. Welcome to Solitary RPG. Let's start out by talking a little bit about what Swords of Meropis is, and basically it is a game with a lot of Greek mythology in it. Meropis itself is part of Greek mythology, and it is themed as a sword and sandal RPG. So that's kind of the vibe, just by reading the back is what you take away from it. The game was created and written by Alan Barr of Gallant Knight Games. You may be familiar with that company. If you're not, you should probably take a look at them. And the graphic design and layout is by Rick Hershey. And I will start by saying the art in this book and the way it was all put together is fantastic. It really captures that Greek vibe with the art, and I just really like the art. The art is just awesome. This basically like normal pencil line art, but with this like watercolor or wash background throughout the art really just captures my attention. It is an art style that I very much like, and it is one of the things that attracted me to the game. So let's get into the book and just start flipping through the pages, talking about the rules. And first and foremost, there's no index in this book. She just got these table of contents. And I will start by saying I think the creator could have put more effort behind the table of contents because there are certain things I was looking for while reading the rules and I couldn't find them here. And there was plenty of room to add that additional information. Maybe because this is a PDF and a print on demand, they can update the table of contents to include a little bit of information and make some corrections. Because I noticed, why did I write this? It says it's on page 76. And if you go to page 76, you got a page for notes. And the actual why did I write this is back here on page like 143. So that's just a little oversight. So hopefully they can correct that. But that's what you have to go with. But there's not a lot of rules, so it's not that big of a deal. But I know how some people may frown upon that. So maybe they can get that corrected. You're going to start out with a little bit of a story. So Meropis is a mythic island and, just a unique place. So that is what this game is pulling from. You get some story to kind of introduce you to some of that information, and then you're going to get some kind of like landmarks, like some of the big cities and some of the players in the city and some of the important information so that you can plop your characters in it and get started. And that's just a few pages. It's not a real deep dive into this world. You just get some basic information to get you started, and then you're going to get right into the game. I don't normally go over like what do you need to play this game. However, I do feel it's important for this game to kind of scratch over this real fast. This is a system that's going to use all the dice. You're going to use your D20s down to your D4s based on the mechanics of the game, and you're actually going to use D3s. It's not listed here as needing a D3 because not a lot of people own D3s. I actually own a lot of D3s because I like having that style of dice. So you may want to add that into your dice pool. So I'm going to talk here about a swordbound sheet because you are playing as a swordbound, but there isn't actually a character sheet for your characters. This game kind of pulls from that old school vibe where you kind of create your own character sheet because the information you're tracking is very basic. You're not keeping very detailed information on your characters, so you just kind of make your own sheet. Obviously, you're going to need pencils and paper, erasers, and all that kind of stuff. You're going to want some sort of tokens or using countdown dice for tracking your wounds, and also dodge points. Dodge points are a unique mechanic to this game, and it's a resource that you're going to manage during combats that can help you avoid combat to keep your character alive a little bit longer. I really like it. You're going to want some sort of markers or something to represent step up or step down statuses. So in this game, the basic rolling mechanic is you're going to roll a d12, and then you're going to add a skill die to that roll. So it could either be anything from a d4 to a d12 added to that dice roll. And the step up and step down mechanic would actually mean you're stepping up that skill dice. So basically, this is the advantage and disadvantage concept. Instead of rolling 2 dice and picking the better, you're actually just stepping up the attribute dice or stepping it down. I really like that. Just makes the game feel a little bit more creative versus just the standard roll 2, pick the best. I like this a lot. And you're also going to want a large set of dice. And the reason for that is they use a mechanic called blood die. And this blood die is used for a few different things for your encounters when you're in combat. And it's recommended that you have a larger set and you set whatever the blood die is in the center of the table. That way people don't grab it because it's not the same size die as everybody's using at the table. It's set apart. You could also just use a very ugly color of dice, so that way people don't put that in their hands. But it's really the larger set is recommended just so people don't grab it. You can do whatever you want. Regular dice and set it on a pedestal, set it someplace else. But the blood die is a tracking dice, and it tracks the encounter, how much damage they're doing to you, if they're able to break your damage threshold, and how much experience your characters get for defeating that encounter. And you just want to keep it separate and alone. So how do you roll dice in this game? Basically, it's you roll a d12 plus your skill dice. Based on the total that you roll, you have a narrative result. So this isn't a, ooh, I succeeded, now I'm going to do a bunch of damage. No. Lots of things can happen. Even a critical success, other things happen on top of that. So let's break this down. If you roll 2 or less, so if you roll 1s on both dice, you just have a failure. You make no forward momentum. That's a complete failure. If you roll between a 3 and a 10, you succeed, but you suffer a setback. And you can choose a mechanical setback, which are listed here. You can harm yourself and suffer a wound. You can cost yourself some resources, and you can lose D3 coins. Or you set yourself for your next skill test as a step down. So those are some mechanical results for a setback. Or you could make a narrative result. But the basic happenings here for a setback is your setback. Something negative happens. You succeeded, but there is a setback to your character. It's just not a simple success. A simple success with no special effects is going to be between 11 and 18. So depending on what your skill dice is on a d12 plus that, getting 11 to 18 is going to be a little bit more challenging. And for a critical success, you're going to need 19 or more. And then you have some mechanical things that you can add to your critical success, such as stepping up your next skill test, or you learn something from this and you gain D4 in the experience bowl. Experience bowl we'll talk about when we get to it, but it's a really neat way of accumulating your experience. Or you can profit some coin, or you can just narratively add something to that critical success. So that's basically how it goes. You might want to print this sheet out or retype it on a separate document so that you have it readily available if you're going to play this system, just until you get used to it. It is a little bit different than your traditional pass-fail systems that we're used to playing, because you're adding a little bit more of a story behind your rolls, and I really like that. So blood die, we talked a little bit about the blood dice. We talked about how it's used for a variety of different things during combat. So let's dive a little bit deeper into what the blood die actually is. all your encounters, your creature encounters, are going to start with some sort of a blood die. Like this hermit starts with a D4, where this one starts with a D6, and you get into some of the bigger ones, they start with a D10. And I think the biggest creatures, which are going to be the serpents, D12. So what you do with your blood die is you put it in the center of the table on a 1. So whatever the die type is for the encounter, that is where they start. Starts out on a D1. The lowest it's ever going to go is a 1 on a D4, and the highest it's ever going to go is a 12 on a D12. And what you do is you start on the 1 during the combat, either through special abilities or from results on your roll or something happening during combat. That blood die is going to tick up. So let's say we start with a D4. It's going to start on a 1. As combat goes on, it might tick up to a 2, then a 3, then a 4. Once the blood die gets to its maximum value, the next time it ticks up, you move up in the die type. So you'd go from a D4 to a D6, and it starts at the same value that the previous dice was on. So the D4 to a D6 the D6 would start on a 4, and then it would continue to tick up. So it's building a little tension. It's adding a little bit more to the story because obviously combat is carrying on, but it's just adding more to it. And as a result, that blood die is actually used to basically kill your PCs. Is going to be used for damage on your PCs, breaking their threshold, and also their experience. And we'll get a little bit more into that, but just keep in mind that's how the blood die works. That's the mechanic. Starts at 1 on whatever the die type is, and during combat it moves up, and the die type can move up as well, and that is going to have some negative effects during combat because that's how damage is done, breaking your threshold, and also it's how you gain your experience. So how does combat work? First, you're going to roll basically initiative, but actually not initiative. So it's interesting in this game. It's a player-facing game, so the encounters automatically hit. But you need to determine, does the encounter go first or does your PC go first? And what you're going to do is you're going to decide what your combat action's going to be. You have a list of actions here. And you're going to roll a skill check using the same chart that we use for rolling dice. So your failure, your setback, success, and critical. And that's going to determine what happens. So if you rolled the 2 and you got a failure, you take your action after your enemy. So your enemy goes first. If you have your setback, you succeed, but you're going to step down your first skill test, your skill dice. So here you're already starting combat off as stepping down your die. If you succeed, you take your action before your enemies, and then if you have a critical success, you may step up your first skill die you roll. So that's how it happens. And then once you've determined who's going first, encounter or you're going to grab your dodge points. And dodge points are actually used to avoid combat. As I said, encounters automatically hit, and you can decide to avoid those hits by spending your dodge points, which are actually generated through character creation. You have a few actions you can take during combat. You can strike a foe. You can use a knack, and knacks are talked about later in the book, but you can use a knack, which are really cool special abilities that characters can use during any type of gameplay. It's really cool stuff. You can move. You can pray, which is something the God Callers would do, cast a spell for sorcerers, or do something else. There's actually combat maneuvers listed in here, and you can do one of those, or you can just do some sort of a narrative thing that might require some sort of a test or something like that. But those are your actions. So up here it says you choose 3 actions during your turn, but it doesn't actually indicate that they have to be different actions. Common sense tells me that they have to be different actions because that's just how role-playing games are played for the most part. You can't just strike 3 times. And as I was reading some of the magic abilities and some of the different skills and things throughout the game, it actually talked about moving multiple times as a special casting spell or some special abilities, which also indicated to me that you can only choose one of these at a time. You can't choose multiples of the same thing. But I guess you could, play rules as written. It doesn't say you can only do one, so that would be up to you. If you're going to strike a foe in close combat, you basically make the same skill check that you made before. The only ones that are going to have any kind of narrative result are going to be your setbacks and your criticals. And here it gives you some suggestions on what those setbacks can be. So if you have a setback during combat, so you're rolling between 3 and 10, you're going to suffer a wound. You're going to harm yourself. So maybe you swung, you hit the encounter, but maybe the blade slipped past the encounter and hit you on the leg. You're going to suffer some sort of a wound. An ally suffers a wound accidentally harming them. So maybe you go through, you swung through and you hit an ally as well. You must step down your next skill dice, or your opponent steps up their next skill dice roll. So here are some mechanical results for that setback. Again, you could also make these something more narrative, but it gives you something to work with as a solo gamer in combat. Nothing is more boring in combat than swing, miss, swing, hit, swing, miss, dodge, block. This just gives you something a little bit more to work with, especially when you start looking at the combat maneuvers, which we'll talk about later. And then here on criticals, you can step up the damage dice, increase the blood die. I kind of scratched my head when I first saw this on increasing the blood die, because the blood die actually represents the amount of damage that an encounter is going to do back to me. So why would I want to increase it? But the blood die is also used for experience. So I guess there might be some mechanical way of, if you know you're about to kill the encounter, you may want to increase the blood die to give you a chance of giving more experience. When we get into experience, you'll see how that would work clearer. But that is one of the things you can do. Your opponent suffers 2 wounds. This is not a high wound game. There's, creatures aren't coming at you with thousands of hit points or anything like that. This is a low point game, including for yourself. You can disarm your opponent. You can knock your opponent prone. Your opponent steps down their next skill dice, gain a dodge point. So those are some of the benefits of rolling criticals, which could be challenging to roll. And then once you've decided damage, you're going to roll your dice, and you got to beat their threshold. There is an alternative way for doing damage in this game. So basically, the way you're going to take damage or give damage is you have to beat the threshold for the encounter. So the damage threshold here is 4. Basically meaning they have an armor value, and this one actually has 2 armor points too, which is a whole nother thing, but they have a damage threshold of 4. So when you go to roll your damage, you have to exceed that threshold to do any points of damage. So if you have a very low damage output, you're rolling like a D4, and you don't think you're going to be able to beat that, or some of the encounters may have a higher damage threshold, so that you might have to roll higher. Like this one's 7. What you can use is kind of an exploding die mechanic to beat that threshold, where if you roll the maximum on the die, you roll again to beat the damage threshold. Once you beat the damage threshold, though, you only do 1 point of damage. It's not the amount over the threshold you do that much damage. You just do a point of damage. That's it. This isn't getting very swingy with doing like, oh, I did 20 points of damage to a creature. Nope, you did a point of damage. And that is it. And that's how wounds are done. So that's how you're going to take wounds and give wounds. One of the things that are also going to happen in this game, and this adds a little bit more to the narrative side of things, every time you take a wound, before you take another action, you have to make a test, and you do a standard skill test, and based on what you roll, if it's a pass, fail, if you fail, your character falls unconscious. done. If you succeed, you continue moving forward, and you take a -1 for every wound that you have. So if I have 3 wounds and I do my skill check, which is going to be a D12 plus a D6, and I get a failure, if I go 2 or less, boom, my character falls unconscious, and then narratively I would explain what happened. Like maybe the wounds, it was just 1,000 cuts. Maybe I only took like 3 wounds, but it was just cuts in really bad spots, and I started bleeding out. Or maybe I took a whack to the head and I just fell unconscious. But it just adds a little bit more to it, so that way, as your character is taking on more damage, they're just not 100% hero. It actually adds in basically like a fatigue mechanic or a wound mechanic that actually has an effect in gameplay, which is kind of cool. And it's one of those things that I kind of admire in an RPG system, especially playing solo, because solo characters don't want to get into a lot of combat. It's one of the things I try to avoid in solo games, is putting my single character into a combat situation. If I can avoid it, I want to, because combat should be dangerous. It should be deadly. We're not playing superheroes here. And then healing, there's just a list of things you can do to heal with taking a rest, taking a break, or doing some rolls, or there could be a caster that can heal you a little bit. And then we get into combat maneuvers. So here's a list of specific combat maneuvers like disarm, shield break, bloody victory, which is actually really cool, and trip. These are just little things you can do to your combat just to add a little bit of spice to something for solo play that can actually be a little boring and dry. Bloody victory is actually a very cool combat maneuver, a little bit gruesome, so I'm going to read it to you, and you can decide if it's something you feel would be fun to do in a game. As an action, after you've done your maneuver that beheaded a foe or slain an enemy, you can take an action to hold their head, carcass, or corpse aloft and make a skill test. If you are successful, every foe who can see you loses 1 action on their next turn. If you are critically successful, they lose their entire next turn or must spend all of their actions fleeing you. So this is just a really kind of a twisted little thing, but I think it fits in the Greek theme, and I just think it's just nice to have some of these combat maneuvers. There's not a long, lengthy list of combat maneuvers, but there's some really cool ones that can give you, like disarming your foe can always be a good thing, or tripping your enemy up. That way, maybe you don't have to fight them to the death, and you can try to just overcome them so that maybe they give you information. So making characters. As I said earlier, there's no character sheet. There's nothing. And I looked online, I couldn't find anything. But once you kind of look at the game, there's not a lot of information. So going back to that old school way of doing things, create your own character sheet. Have some fun with it. Be a little artistic and make something fun and creative. But basically, you have 4 attributes. Your attributes are listed here: wise, hale, agile, and mighty. Basically, your attributes determine what kind of a character you're building. So the higher your attribute score is in one of these categories, kind of makes up what your character is going to be. You're going to roll 3d6. They give you some basic mechanics here. You may re-roll or swap 2 attributes of your choice when making your character. So it gives you a little flexibility in case you are wanting to make a god caller or a sorcerer and you didn't roll high enough in wise. You can try to get that higher result. And then you'll get 3 attribute points to spend to increase those attributes. You can increase 1 by 3. You can increase 1 by 2 and another 1 by 1, or you can increase 3 by 1. Pretty straightforward stuff. That's your attributes. Your attributes are really going to decide who you are, and they're going to give you your damage threshold, your dodge points, and your melee damage. What's neat about melee damage, it doesn't matter what weapon you have. I have a dagger or sword. It is my strength that's going to determine how much damage I do. It is not the weapons. Weapons are just narrative. The only thing that will happen in combat is if you have a two-handed weapon, you get a little bit of a bump in that, adding another d4 to your damage, but it is still primarily based on your strength to determine how much damage you do. Your dodge points are determined by your agility. Your damage threshold is determined by your hail, which is also your life. And then wise, this is if you want to be a sorcerer. If you get 14 plus in wise, you can be a god caller or a sorcerer. If you get 16 plus in wise, you can be both. So you can pull from both the god caller prayers or the sorcerer's magic. However, there is a negative side to that one, and you may want to really consider that before doing it, because if you fail, you basically can't cast anymore until you atone for your failure. Very cool stuff. And then you had some skills. So this gets interesting. Skills are just words. They're not specifically written out as what these skills are. So that's kind of neat, because maybe you see some kind of a skill that you want to add to this, as long as you're cool with it, or if you're playing with a group, the group is good with it, you can add to this list, because they're just words. There's no mechanical narrative written with it or anything mechanical written with it. You would just have to decide. How do you get skills? You got 10 points to spend, and you pick some skills, you spend some points. Skill ranking is 1, 2, 3. This gives you a die type 4, 6, 8. So if you need to do an animal kin skill, you're going to do your D12 plus whatever your skill level is, 4, 6, or 8, trying to succeed. You got your little chart. You just look at your chart for success or failure, and then narratively come up with your results. Pretty straightforward. You're going to notice you can only go up to a D8 during character generation, but through experience, you can get this all the way up to a D12 as the game goes on. So I like this, because these are just basically spark words that you're going to use in your narrative story, and it's not linked to this only does that type stuff. And if you're not that creative and you just want to do a package for the different types of characters in the game, like a merchant, a thief, a hunter, a warrior, they have some pre-generated for you, which is fun. Deeds and experience. So when I was talking earlier in the game, I talked about an experience bowl. Well, that's where this comes into play. So during game sessions, when you are doing certain deeds or you're playing your game, first of all, what is a deed? A deed is something that you have to do during gameplay that requires a skill test of some sort, and it helps drive the story forward. It adds to the narrative of the story. That is what is classified as a deed, and you gain experience for that. Based on what that deed is, will determine kind of what kind of a die what you will gain for putting into your experience bowl. So if it's something minor, it'd be a D4. Something grand would be a D10. The author created some ideas or examples so that you can gauge kind of where that deed will fall, so that you can put the right die in the experience bowl. The end of the session or the leg of the journey, when you're about to give out the experience points, what you do is you scoop up all of those dice in the experience bowl and you roll them. And that is how much experience your characters are going to gain. So the mechanics of this experience bowl really drive you to want to do things, do something epic, do something amazing during gameplay to add dice to that bowl, so that you get that big hand. Who doesn't like rolling a big handful of dice? And then you roll them and you gain your experience. Yes, is it a little bit swingier? Yeah, you could roll a bunch of ones and not get a whole lot. That's just part of the Greek mythology, and the gods just frowned on you. Maybe you didn't tell a good enough narrative story. You didn't create that legend. You can make up that stuff. But anyways, that's how the experience is gained. For combat experience, though, it's a little bit different. With combat experience, at the end of the combat, you roll the blood die. And that is the experience gained from the die. So yes, a blood die, you could take on a huge encounter, one of the big serpents, slash and going, you finally kill the big serpent and you roll a 1. It happens. It's just, that's kind of the gamey side of this, but I still like it. It makes it a little bit more, you can tell more of a narrative story. You can add a little bit more to it. You can really lean on that, and maybe you need to pray more to your gods and try to get more experience. But that's how it's done. But this experience, this is when I was talking about the combat results and the critical success. We talked a little bit about increasing your blood die. That is why you may want to increase your blood die, because maybe you're bringing your encounter to an end. Like maybe it's only got 1 hit point left, and you rolled that critical, leaving that encounter with just that 1 hit point. Maybe you take that chance, you push your luck a little bit, you increase that blood die to, maybe it goes from a 6 to an 8, and then you take them out the next turn. Boom, now you got a chance of gaining more experience. And that's kind of how the blood die is used for experience. And this is how deeds are used during gameplay to create your experience bowl so that you can gain more experience. Just a unique mechanic for the game. And then you just have ways of spending that experience for increasing your character's attributes, skill rankings, which is pretty cool that you can up your skill rankings. Everything has to go in order, so you can't go from 10 to 16. You have to go 10, 11, 12, 13. You got to build up one at a time, which is pretty standard stuff. You can actually use your experience to gain coin, which is really neat, because let's say you want to buy something new, or there's a really kind of cool mechanic in this game for gaining experience, and I kind of glossed over it and didn't really talk about it, but if you spend your coin frivolously, if you just piss it off, you go and get pissed drunk, do something stupid with it, you gain experience equal to the coin spent. So that's kind of neat. But you pissed off all your coin, you did get some experience, but you need to go buy something, you can use your experience to buy back some coin. Just a neat way of looking at things. And then you got Knacks. So Knacks are very interesting, and I like them. So they kind of move on. They're found here at the end of the sorcerer section. And these are just special abilities that your character can gain to help with gameplay, and they can help in combat, or they can just add to some narrative, fun stuff, kind of fun, neat stuff that I really like. And what's cool about these is they're just not reoccurring. So let's say Great Leap here. You immediately leap a great distance, up to 2 movement actions in distance. So boom, boom, you get to, you're jumping high. You don't get to use it again your next turn. In order to regain it, you must take a wound from falling a significant distance. So you have a choice. I'm going to take my Great Leap. Now I've got to take a wound from falling in order to use that again. And it doesn't really say when that wound has to take effect. Could the falling, from a significant distance, like you leap up onto a building, you do something, and then you jump back down and you take the wound, then you can regain Great Leap again. It doesn't really say exactly how all this is done, but you're in control of the game, so you can make those decisions as the solo game player or as the controller of the game. You can make those decisions. Some of these are just kind of basic, and some of these are really fun, like Iron Constitution. You hold your liquor, avoiding any negative impacts and any poisons or sicknesses in your body. Okay, so you can drink like a fish and be okay. You must spend an entire day drinking and get blackout drunk. So basically, this is where maybe spending your coin frivolously comes in, and you have Iron Constitution. You just spend everything getting blasted, getting drunk, you black out. There's going to be no negative effects to your body, so you're not going to get alcohol poisoning or anything like that. Strictly a narrative knack that you can do to add to your story and have that grin just like this guy has on his face. So that's what knacks are. and that is something you gain by spending experience. You can only have up to 5 Knacks, and they just cost like basically 10 points. So you start at 10, the next one would be 20, next one 30, next one 40, fifth one is 50 points. You can have all those Knacks. They're really cool. Armors and weapons. Hey, look, there's not a lot of information here about weapons as far as them doing anything special. It's just basically their cost, and that's it. Your encounters automatically hit you during combat. So you're just going to attack back. The only one that has any kind of special rules is going to be a two-handed weapon, adds another d4 to the damage roll you make. But it takes 2 points, 2 dodge points to make an attack, to miss attack on you. So if you only have 3 dodge points and you're wielding a two-handed weapon, you guys spend 2 of those dodge points to avoid an attack. Armor absorbs wounds, so light armor absorbs 1 wound, medium armor absorbs 2, heavy does 3. You can track this by checking boxes, so it's not all the time. So if you have light armor, you can avoid your first wound, but after that, you're going to start taking the wounds. The armor's been destroyed. It doesn't regenerate. And if you do carry a shield, there is a special rule for shield break, which basically means you can break a shield to avoid damage. That's it. That's your weapons. They're just basically narrative information, and it's not, the weapons themselves do not do any damage. And I like that, because if you step back and think about it, if I'm a big mighty warrior and I attack somebody and I hit them with my sword, I'm probably going to do more damage based on my strength than the weapon. So if you take a weaker warrior, maybe with a lower strength, and we both hit with the same weapon, obviously the stronger person with a little bit more rage, a little bit more strength is going to do more damage. So it kind of works. I kind of like that. And we'll try that out as time goes on. Getting coin. So coin in this game is just coin. There's no standard. It's not gold, silver, copper, whatever. It's just coin. There is one mechanical way of getting coin. That's basically at the beginning of a session. You can take a skill test of whatever one you want. Based on your success, if you fail, you get 0. Setback, you get 5 coin. Then you have some results. Success, you get 10 coin. Critical, 15 coin. This is the mechanical way of getting coin to spend. Obviously, other ways of getting coin was through combat and through adventuring. You can get coin, but to start the game out or start a session out to give your players some coin, this is one way of doing it. You can spend it. You're going to notice you have half coin charges here, which is just, again, there's no standard, so you don't have to convert anything. You just have, 4.5. That's just how you're going to do your coin. You have some things you can purchase. You have rooms like a hospitalities. You have clothing, transportation, combat gear. You can buy your own armor, and all that armor information was listed just on this little couple paragraphs here on how that's used, and just things like that. Then it gets into God Callers. So these are kind of your 2 special classes, because God Callers would be more of your religious class, your clerics types, and they're going to pray to their god, and they have their own little success failure table here of what would happen, and then they have some spell effects here. Sorcerers, same thing, but here's your list of spells. You know all of them. You know all these spells. That's all there is. There's not many. You can also have this clockwork companion, which is kind of just a mechanical cat, which is cool. So anyways, and that's your sorcerers, and you have your spells. And then that's it. And then if you do the double, if you're going to be both, if you want to pull from both the God Caller and the sorcerers, here's what happens. So basically, if you're both, this means if you fail to cast a spell or invoke a prayer, you suffer both D3 wounds immediately and cannot cast spells or pray again until you've spent an hour in atonement or a day has passed. So by being this ultra character, this God Caller sorcerer, there's a chance of failure. Obviously, in any game, there's a chance of failure. And if that happens, you have really negative effects. So you really want to consider do I want to do this or not? And I mean, through a storytelling, this could just be awesome, but it may not work so well for certain situations, especially when you are being called upon to help heal and do other things. And then we've already looked at Knacks. Knacks are special things you gain through spending experience. I really think they're very cool. They have a lot of fun narrative stuff that you can add to your story. Now we're going to talk about enemies, allies, and foes. And what you do to set up your combat is you're going to take your blood die for the encounter. So the sand demon has a d4. You set that on the table on a 1. The number of wounds, this is how many wounds the sand demon can take. So 4 wounds. And then their attack. So the way they attack back, encounters always hit. And what you're going to do is you're going to take their attack die along with the current blood die. And if they exceed your damage threshold, you are going to take wounds equal to the current blood die, unless it's noted differently. And that's how attacks happen from encounters. Don't forget you have your dodge points. You can use those to avoid the combats. And then the damage threshold, this is how much you have to beat in order for the encounter to take damage. And that is basically how encounters are handled. So these are the encounters in the core book. You can just flip through them. You can just see all the different things that you can encounter, some fun stuff. But as you kind of go through this, towards the end, you're going to get kind of like some standard people you may come in contact with. So that way, in case you need an NPC or someone to encounter, you got some stats to pull from. And then you got the Kraken in the back. There are 2 adventures in the back of the book, which are going to add some more characters that you can encounter. Like here's a Medusa and some other things. So you can also pull from there if you wanted to, depending on what you're doing. And that, that basically wraps up the core rules. Now we're going to jump into the solo rules. There's not much here. There's a lot of things you're keeping track of. There's a lot of cool rolling to do, but it's not a real deep system, which is cool because I kind of like, I don't want to say this is a rules light system. It's not like a Morkborg or something like that. There's more here to it. But it's not super crunchy. You can pretty much wrap your head around this really quickly and start playing. When we get into the GM list or the solo rules, this is where you got your oracle. If you're going to ask your yes/no questions, basically how likely is it going to be, and this is what you need to roll on a die. So if it's almost certain, just roll a 1+ on the die, which means it's going to happen. That's why it's almost certain. But then it just steps up from there. If it's a 50-50, you got to get a 6+. If it's very unlikely, you need a 10+. So that's how you're going to get your yes/no questions. If you're familiar with solo gameplay, this is pretty straightforward stuff. Here's something kind of neat, though. You can add a complication to that roll. So instead of it just being this simple yes/no kind of result, you can take a d6, roll along with your d12, and add this to the narrative if it fits. If it doesn't fit, like you roll it and it's like, it just doesn't work with the question that I was asking, then just ignore it. Nothing saying you have to do that. It's just something that you can add to your roll just to add a little bit more narrative story to what's going on. Then you have your standard D100 action and theme tables that we're pretty used to, especially if you played Mythic or you've been playing solo for a while. You just roll up on these charts, you get some spark words to help try to add to your story. And then combat actions. So this is an AI system for combat in this RPG. So basically, if the encounter is at full health, you can roll a d10 and you can use this to determine what they're going to do versus always swinging at you, which is something I really like. Then at half health and quarter health, and at half health and quarter health, they could actually flee. So that adds to your solo experience. And then you actually have your intentions. What's your encounter going to do, like a reaction table. First and foremost, if you're encountering a monster or something possessed by evil spirits, it's always going to attack. So you're not going to, take this minotaur or this bull and convince them to be your friend. But this is more for those city encounters. If you're, messing around with the city guard or some of those other encounters that are towards the back of the book, another person of sorts, you can actually add a little bit to it to give them something to respond to. And then you have an Overland adventure oracles or tables that you can roll on for the different parts of the world. This world is not detailed out, so you can put this wherever you want. You can do your standard hex crawl type systems that you enjoy and add it to the game. You can use the new hex deck from Philip Reed if you want. Lots of neat stuff out there for hex crawling, but they give you some stuff that you can pull from the story itself or from the creator just to add to your game. And then after you get done with the Overland adventure, you have fearsome enemies. So if you encounter something really bad, here you go. But what's neat about this is you roll again and you can determine if they're going to ambush you. And nobody wants to be ambushed by a great boar because they're going to just take those tusks and gut you. But yeah, you got a fearsome enemy. Maybe you roll up on the fearsome enemy and that's what you're going out to encounter. Doesn't mean they're going to encounter you right away. And then maybe when you finally found them, then you can roll the ambush rule to see if they tracked you and were watching you. Stuff like that. You can have all kinds of fun with it. What do you find? Basically a treasure chart. Pretty straightforward. Now we get into the swordbound band. So this is one of the things for solo gaming that's going to make it a little bit more enjoyable to add some people to your adventure. Because sometimes when you have to solo play with multiple characters and you're running multiple characters, it can get a little hard because, are you really doing yourself any favors by running multiple characters in the game? Well, what ends up happening with this game, first of all, you have an AI chart you can roll on to see what they're going to do. But based on the type of companion that's running with you, they just add some bonuses during gameplay. And they have some that are predetermined, like the shield comrade, the tracker, oracle, sellsword, thief, scholar, and I believe that's it. Yeah, that's it. So they just add to your combat. You can actually give them some personality off of this chart. But they come with their standard wounds, their attacks, their skill dice, some abilities, equipment, and special abilities. So I like that. Yeah, you still may roleplay them a little bit, but they're just going to add a little bit more to your main PC's survivability. One of the things that will happen with the companions is if they're ever rendered unconscious, there's a chance that they're going to go to the next town and disappear for a couple weeks from you. And if they continue to get rendered unconscious, they may just abandon you. That's just, they don't trust you after a while. And you have to pay for their upkeep. But after you've had them with you for a period of time, it's basically like 12 different types of journeys, adventures, encounters, or towns. It's all kind of listed. After 12 of them, you can stop paying for their upkeep. They've become loyal to you and they're going to stay with you. And you basically are creating a brotherhood at that point, or a family. And it's really cool. And that's basically the end of the solo rules. And what I kind of like is I like how the solo rules are written, but I like just how the core rules with the success, the narrative success failure rate actually adds to the story. And I do like the experience bowl. I like that concept. I don't play long campaigns, so I don't know if I would grow a character to where I'm really taking advantage of that in a solo game. But it is something you may want to consider when creating your character, is put a bunch of random dice in a bowl, roll them out, give yourself some experience, and start your character out stronger for your solo adventure. Then the second half of this book is two different adventures. One of them is an ocean adventure. So if you're into sailing the seas, which you may or may not want to do, it's up to you. But there's a little ocean hex crawl type thing where you're rolling for encounters on the ocean. These adventures come with lots of cool charts that you can roll with and enemies, so it kind of helps draw that, makes that adventure just a little bit easier with these tables about what's happening, what happens in the hex when you move on to it, and just different things like that. I haven't really spent a lot of time reading the adventures. If I ever do decide to play these adventures, then I will surprise myself by reading them at that point. And then the other one is basically diving into the depths of the underworld, kind of like Dante's Inferno, going through the seven rings of hell. It's that kind of a concept where you're just going down further and further in an overland hex adventure, going into the depths of hell or the underworld. And the wonderful people you can encounter along the way, like that lovely little hellhound. Give him a biscuit, he'll be your friend for a second. And then, same thing, more tables to roll on, just to make your adventure a little bit easier and easier for solo play, and a new companion that you can find. Now, this piece of art is my character art. I just love that character art. Yeah, the fingernails are a little bit unmanicured, but I just love that art. That is awesome. And I kind of wish they would have done maybe tarot-sized cards with this art. As you saw us flipping through it, the art is just fantastic. And you can use any of that art to help kind of get your story going, get your adventure going, get your imagination going. Art is an important thing when we are playing games, just to keep our imagination flowing. So that's a look at Swords of Meropis. And cool game. My intentions with this game, probably not going to do solo RPG with it. I have this knack after reading this. I want to do gladiatorial combat. I want to build a band of characters, and I want to just be thrown in the arena with some of these crazy encounters like the giant spiders, maybe a wild boar, some skeleton hordes. I just want to be thrown in a combat situation, and I want to play with this blood die. I think the blood die is just a unique mechanic, and I really want to get my head wrapped around it to see if it's something that is going to work or if it's not going to work. I just want to see how the mechanics for combat really work in this game. But I think that's pretty much where this game's going to go for me. It's just going to be for like gladiatorial combat, just having a good time. Maybe we're in this crazy world of Meropis, and one of the towns is gathering up the unique wildlife, throwing it into a pit and taking, prisoners or just people that feel they can be great warriors, and maybe it could be an initiation to join the army or something like that. And just use it that way and just have a little narrative story that way, but just seeing how the combat works. And I think with the companion rules, the way the companions can still attack and do things, but they can actually add a bonus to your PC, could actually be a fun way of doing that. So that has been my look at this game. Thank you very much for watching, and have a great day. Bye.